In this session, we're going to be doing the first part of our policy building by configuring policy sets within ISE. Let's go ahead and move into that screen right now, and we'll talk a little bit about the functions and capabilities around a policy set. First off, we should note that there's already a default policy set that Cisco puts in place, of course, as default. Let's take a quick peek at that. Within the default policy set, we've got some example authentication policy, one authentication rule for MAB, one for 8021X, and pointing to distinct identity stores, kind of almost a plug-and-play approach there. And then some authorization policy that's best described as an example of policy statements that can be configured. Some of these are active and helpful, such as the blacklist rule. And of course, we can see, and we'll divulge later as these sessions move forward, what the contents of these authorization profiles are. But we would expect things like DACL and or airspace ACL listings, etc. And then always at the bottom of both authentication and authorization rule, there's a default rule that's in place, and typically that's set to deny access. But we've got the opportunity with any policy to be able to manipulate otherwise. And kind of going back to our policy set screen, the idea of adding additional policy sets provides value around administrative organization, isolation. Quite likely policy descriptions for certain functional areas would be different than for others. That would be true of a business unit, a location, a particular device type. And then individual policy sets also allow a defining of a role-based administration. So some administrators can administrate some policy sets and not others, for example. Okay, let's create our first policy set. We can take advantage of the plus button to create a new policy set. We can also take advantage of the gear icon to be able to insert new rows. Default policy set is always going to be at the bottom, so you can only insert above that. Okay, for our policy set name, wired. And then within here we can provide a description, and then this next box opens up the Condition Studio. And as this is our first time here, it gives us a little tour, lets us know that we can filter out of a conditions library. What these are pre-built sets of conditions, usually compound conditions, to create these easy drag and drop type elements, and you can add to this library as needed. Drag and drop over there, and we can add specific conditions to create our own particular elements and then apply that into a particular policy. Click this box here to get rid of that helpful information. In this case, we're going to select a particular attribute that's not already built into the library, and they let us know how that works. And we've got unique icons here to provide some categorization, as this is a very large list. And then we can also type in the boxes above the columns to be able to do some quick finds. Okay, as we hover over the icons, that lets us know what we're looking at. As mentioned, this list is quite large, and so we'll isolate things a little bit. A somewhat intuitive icon that we're looking for network device and device type, and that device type that we did in the previous session has been added to that library, so we didn't have to type anything in there, and we'll have a quite specific match. If we hit the save button here, this will be saved as a library element that we see on the left. So if we're using this repeatedly over and over, we could add that as our own library object. In this case, we're going to select use, and now this is added as a condition to reach into this policy set. And it will, as we're getting network authentication requests from our network access devices, it will match that element that we've configured as by virtue of adding that network device. So it will match this particular set of condition, and we'll use this policy set versus any other. The last thing to select here is a basic policy component, which protocols are allowed. This is basically a set of protocols that's created by default. Within that, we can redefine that default network access group or create our own set of allowed protocols, and within there we would select or deselect 8 variations that we would want to be viable or usable within this policy set. The ones that are not checked will mean that they're not allowed to be used in this policy set. The additional policy set that we'll create, and we can save this here, take advantage of the gear icon where the plus box is not present, and do a new row above, and we'll create a separate policy set for wireless. Now that we've been in the Condition Studio once already, it's not giving us that helpful information. And we'll do the same operation as we did for the wired policy set. In this case, our device type, and notice some of the other components that we can match in there, is going to be wireless. And likewise, the allowed protocols within default network access. And we'll save that grouping. Now, understand that within each policy set, it has its own containers of authentication and authorization policy that is separate for all intents and purposes from the authentication and authorization policies in other policy sets. And then notice at this quick view, we also get hit counters as these policy sets are matched, so we have a good idea of how they're being utilized from this broad perspective. Likewise, get hit counters on the individual rules within each policy set also. Alright, this is our first set of policy building and a little bit of organization. Not a requirement. All policy that's needed for a production environment could be developed and utilized within the default policy set. There wouldn't be any problem with that. It's just the benefits for organization around the policies that are needed, and then the possible need to isolate administration to individual administrators subsequent to that.